Hello everyone, and welcome to the 226th episode of Analyzing Evil, featuring Xendor from Star Wars. So these Star Wars episodes are supposed to be released as additional episodes alongside my regularly scheduled ones. But as you can probably tell, this week I went ahead and made 2 Star Wars episodes. And as most of you probably guessed, the reason why is because the day I'm releasing this video is May the 4th be with you, otherwise known as Star Wars Day. And after realizing that while I was in the middle of making the episode I already had planned for this week, I decided to pivot to a Star Wars character. And considering I've been rather neglectful of the 4th in recent years, I felt like that was appropriate. Fear not though, for that doesn't mean there's going to be less regular episodes this month, for one of these weeks will contain 2 regular Analyzing Evil episodes, in case you were worried. But with all that in mind, as you can see, this video is on Xendor, a character with an interesting history in the franchise, who serves as the instigator of the very first conflict between the Jedi Order and what would come to be known as Dark Jedi, a conflict known as the First Great Schism. However, though this is indeed the first conflict between Darksiders and Jedi, the Progenitor Order, the Jedi Order, was involved in a series of conflicts of their own against the dark side, the Force Wars, which you'll learn a bit more about in this video. But you can also catch a glimpse of the events that preceded these wars in more detail by watching the episode I made on a man who could be considered the very first Dark Jedi, Dagan Locke, if you're interested of course. So in some ways, this conflict Xendor initiated was in fact the Second Great Schism. But semantics aside, we've reached a pretty significant milestone in my coverage of Star Wars Evil, and I'm eager to start getting into the details of Xendor's character and his story. So without further ado, let's begin. As I briefly mentioned in the intro, the Jedi Order once went by another name, the Jedi Order, an order of Force users that were spirited to the planet Tython by massive pyramidal ships who held to a much more literal idea of balance in the Force than their successors would. The Jedi called the light side Ashla and the dark Bogan, and rather than believing balance lay solely in Ashla, they put forth the idea that equal parts Ashla and Bogan were required for an individual to find balance in the Force. After a rather harrowing conflict with the Rakata in 25,793 BBY, some members of the Order called for a push towards Bogan, for it was their willingness to immerse themselves in darkness that played a crucial role in their victory. So not long after their war with the Rakata, a rift was formed in the Jedi Order between the increasingly loud followers of Bogan and those who clung to the old ways of balance, and eventually, their squabbling resulted in the Force Wars 10 years following the conflict with the Rakata, a cataclysmic series of battles that resulted in the eventual defeat of the followers of Bogan, and the Jedi Order remade into the Jedi Order, with the surviving followers of Bogan scattered throughout the galaxy, never to be heard from again. Seeing the great strife forced upon them by 2 groups allied to the dark, this new order strove to find balance solely through the light side, a policy which brought them over 1,000 years of peace and prosperity. But all that would change when Xendor was inducted into their order. Xendor was a member of the exiled Kashimir dynasty of the planet Kashi, which was unfortunately destroyed when the planet went supernova either in 25,000 BBY or 24,500 BBY. Now this is something we've yet to really encounter in these episodes, and that's conflicting information when it comes to dates. But I've only found one source that claims that the star in the Kashi system went supernova in 25,000 BBY, and many more that revolve around the year 24,500 BBY. So as far as Xendor's story goes, we're going to assume that 24,500 is the correct date here. So with that in mind, Xendor's story is actually relatively short as far as time goes. According to the Star Wars Encyclopedia, Xendor was exiled from his homeworld for combining the Teräs Käsi martial art with the dark side. Sometime after, a woman by the name of Reda Jaluz stole the Kashimir talisman, a treasure of the Kashimir dynasty that was said to contain a dark power within it, and after feeling guilty for it, she returned to Kashi to return the talisman. But shortly after she did so, the star that Kashi orbited went supernova and destroyed the planet, rendering Xendor incapable of ever returning to his homeworld. That didn't matter too much, however, for as a student of the Force, Xendor would go on to seek out other Force users in his exile, which led him to the Jedi Order and the planet Ossus, where he was inducted into the Order. However, his experience with the dark side caused him to question the peaceful ways of the light side-based Jedi, and not long after he joined, he'd split from the Order and create his own organization, the Legions of Leto. And to get a better idea of how all this came to pass, let's take a look at some information given to us by Xendor's lover Arden Lin that we can find in the sourcebook The Essential Guide to Warfare. According to ancient records, the Jedi Order began on Tython, where Force users tapped energy they called the Ashla, rejecting the lures of dark energy they called the Bogan. The Force Wars pitted adherents of the 2 creeds against each other, with the Ashla victorious. But a new conflict later arose between the Jedi, then based on Ossus, and a splinter group that called itself the Legions of Leto. Little was known conclusively of this conflict until the discovery of the warrior Arden Lin, who had survived 25,000 years in stasis before being awakened by Imperial agents in 4 BBY. Lin killed Inquisitor Amisadarius and fought off Antinous Tremaine, but was maimed and captured by Torben, who filed these selections from her debriefing. The Jedi, those handmaidens of the Ashla, the weak side of the Force, for 10,000 years they sat on Tython, staring into the stars and debating the nature of the cosmos, like a sewing circle of widows on Bashara. They did nothing. They were nothing. And without us, they might have remained nothing. The Jedi called the Bogan the dark side, but it is the side of vitality, of purpose. For what does life do? Whatever it must to survive. It thrums with a desire to compete, to overcome, to better itself. Is that selfish? Those who must fight to survive would laugh at the question. Striving, besting, these desires can lead to hate and to war. It is true, but they also drive love, passion, and creation itself. That is the Bogan, the power that drives all life, from one-celled organisms to the leviathans of deep space. The crowning joke, Xendor liked to say, was that we created the Jedi. It was the followers of the Bogan who gave the Order something to define itself against. It was the followers of the Bogan who drove the Order to shape itself into something other than a band of useless mystics. The Bogan gave the Jedi focus. It gave them purpose. It made them strong. The wars of Tython were ancient history in my time. The Ashla and the Bogan fought, and the followers of the Bogan were defeated, and so they fled Tython. They went in many directions, heeding the Bogan's commands. In some places, they discovered others who had been awakened by the Bogan and learned their traditions. In others, they served as teachers of their own ways. But always, the message was the same. Go forth, survive, multiply, succeed. The Jedi called it the Great Schism. As tends to happen, later events forced it to be renamed the First Great Schism. We didn't call it anything. The worlds of the core had joined together to form the Republic, but there were dangers beyond the Rim. The old empire of Zim, the slave kingdoms of the Hutts, and all manner of satrapies and dominions that your historians have forgotten. After my investment as a steel hand of Palawa, I journeyed to Pelgrin to learn my fortune from the Oracle. This was before the Jedi expunged all knowledge of the Oracle, as they expunged so much that threatened their own power and prestige. I listened to the clockwork of the Oracle, and it told me many things. It told me that I should go to Ossus, where I would meet a man fair of face and clever of mind, and make him my master. Ossus was the headquarters of the Jedi Order, which had left Tython to distance itself from the machinations of the growing Republic. I was welcome there, as were other followers of Palawa. We were considered fellow students of the Force, but the Order was already changing, growing doctrinaire. Its masters had fallen prey to the whispering of the Snouts, the Kamasi, those ancient beguilers of humanity, and they had fallen prey to the whispering of their own ambition, the collective ambition that seeks to deny that of the individual so that the strong can be weakened and ruled more easily. By the time I arrived, it was too late. The Order had set itself upon the path it would follow, but that is never apparent at the time. Only later can we discern the point when change became an impossibility. At Ossus, I met Xendor, the man of my vision. He was a Kashimere exile, a master of the breath, as his people called the Force. He was respected in the Order, but vocal in his disapproval of its increasingly exclusionary ways. He first came to me because he wished to learn more about the Palawan martial arts, but he warned me that we should converse quietly, away from the Jedi hierarchs. I don't know if he knew then that he would break with the Order, and I would follow him, but I knew he would, just as I knew we would become friends, and then lovers. The clockwork had already told me so. At the beginning, the break was peaceful. Xendor sought the Hierarch's permission to create an academy for the study of Force traditions, to tap the knowledge of the Chados Academy, and the Daibendu, the Palawa, and the Kashimere, the Bogan, and the Keldor sages, the Way of the Dark, and the Protectorate of the Hidden. When they said no, as he'd known they would, he left the Order to found his own academy on Leto. I accompanied him, and others followed, first by ones and twos, then in larger groups. These newcomers took to calling themselves the Legions of Leto, for they swore to defend us and our right to seek knowledge of the Force without the interference of the Jedi hierarchs and their pronouncements about what was correct and what was forbidden. The Jedi had sought to make the Force smaller, to cage it with rules and restrictions, but we knew that the Force was larger than any such mortal endeavors, and that it turned aside no one who was willing to learn its mysteries. We had thought the Jedi would leave us alone to seek our own path, but that was naive. The mere suggestion that there was any other way to know the Force Our mere existence was a threat to them, and so they branded us dissenters and schismatics and pushed us towards open conflict. They formed armies against us, and so we had to do the same. Xendor, to his dismay, became our general. I served as his right hand. To spare the galaxy bloodshed and pain, we tried to stop the war in its earliest stages by bringing the fight to Ossus, away from the Republic worlds. We failed, and the Jedi pursued us into the core. Xendor tried to alert the Republic to its peril, to make the people see that the Jedi would cloak themselves as protectors and guardians as they waged war and took the levers of power. But he failed, and it was war. War on Chandrila and Brental, then Coruscant and Metalos. Xendor died at Kalumas, as the Jedi and the armies they beguiled closed in. I wasn't there, but I saw it as if I had been. Adrista Pina, known as the Green Blade, was the leader of the Jedi forces. He was a good choice, a grim man, and bloody-minded. He'd spent little time on Ossus, preferring to travel the ancient space lanes beyond the Rim in search of knowledge. I admired him, and so did Xendor. He was better suited to be a renunciate than a Jedi. Except Pina had a fatal flaw. A childlike belief that order and structure were the pillars of civilization, and a refusal to see that they could become civilization's chains. What we understood as freedom, he could only see as chaos. Pina's legends had one advantage over ours. They would use the Force to fight as a collective, subsuming their individuality to a battle meld so that they moved and reacted as one. We could not match them in this. We would not match them in this. We would not fight like insects. At Kalumas, Pina's armies cut off Xendor and his vanguard from the bulk of his forces, and Pina's Jedi Knights advanced on my love as one. Beside him stood the mightiest of our warriors, the likes of Seth Alasiaj and Tun Bohoi. But one by one, they fell to the Jedi Hive, until finally, Pina struck down my love, and his spirit fled into the dark, rather than be drunk by the Green Blade and destroyed. Then they came to Leto to kill the rest of us. I knew there was no hope of victory, only of escape. And so we held Pina's armies off just long enough to seek refuge beyond the Republic's borders. I fled into the tangled stars beyond Kylo Fard, following secret ways Xendor had discovered. But the Green Blade followed, and I was cornered on Arkala. I had the Kashimir talisman bequeathed to me by Xendor, the symbol of his sundered royal house, and when Pina battered the blade out of my hand, I drew upon this talisman's powers, making it a lens for my rage and sorrow. For my love for Xendor, and my despair over what had been taken from us, I exploded Pina's blade, driving its shards through his body. He was ruined, and I laughed out loud to see it. But as I told you, Adrista was a bloody-minded man. He had learned to use the Force to bind and smother an opponent, to subdue one's life energies. Mori Crow, they called it. Even as his eyes grew dull, Pina did this to me. I felt my lungs topple, my heart grow heavy and strain, my lungs flutter and struggle. I saw him die, but his spell could not be unmade. All went gray, and I knew no more. Pina had not killed me, though many times I have wished he had. I do not know who constructed my tomb or set me within it. I awoke to your faces. I awoke to find that 25,000 years had gone by. All I knew, and all I loved, curdled into history, and then dismissed as myth. Not even dust remains of those who were dear to me. I have outlived planets, and the very constellations are scrambled and strange. I am alone in a way none of you could possibly imagine. Xendor told me he once journeyed to a dread world where the Force was worshipped as a triad of divine beings. The daughter was the light side, the son was the dark side, and the father was the Force itself, perhaps. Xendor said he spoke with these beings, and I asked eagerly what he had discovered. He laughed at me and dismissed the question. Even now, you refuse to understand, he told me. There are as many truths to the Force as there are hearts within which the Force manifests itself. The existence of the Triad has no more bearing on the reality of the Force than the Ashla and the Bogan, or anything I tell you, or anything you tell others. Any philosophy, creed, or religion that opens the heart to the Force proves itself to be true. My legions follow the dictates of such a creed, but that is only a demonstration of the application of power, Arden. It says nothing about the rightness of our beliefs or the universality of our faith. So that is the bulk of the information we have about Xendor's life. And after reading through it, we encounter something interesting. The idea that Xendor was a much more level-headed, intelligent, and philosophical Darksider than we're typically used to seeing. All he wanted to do was experience everything that the Force had to offer, not just what the Jedi believed he should experience. And he tried to do so in a peaceable way by first asking for permission from the Order's elders. And when that didn't work, he simply chose to leave and start his own order so he could study the Force in the ways he wished to, and offer others of a like mind the chance to do so as well, which is about as peaceful and noble as you can get when pursuing such a path. Furthermore, that last bit of philosophical wisdom from Xendor paints us an even grander picture of the man. Even now, you refuse to understand, he told me. There are as many truths to the Force as there are hearts within which the Force manifests itself. The existence of the Triad has no more bearing on the reality of the Force than the Ashla and the Bogan, or anything I tell you, or anything you tell others. Any philosophy, creed, or religion that opens the heart to the Force proves itself to be true. My legions follow the dictates of such a creed, but that is only a demonstration of the application of power, Arden. It says nothing about the rightness of our beliefs, or the universality of our faith. That doesn't sound like a man who's power-hungry and ready to unleash evil upon the galaxy. Far from it. So can we really claim that Xendor was evil when taking into account this information? Yes, we can, but he's certainly not the most evil person to ever breathe air in the Star Wars galaxy. In Arden Lynn's account of her time with Xendor, she states that after Xendor established the Academy on Leto, that he decided to take the fight to the Jedi on Ossus before they came to Leto to do much the same, which would make Xendor the aggressor in this scenario, an aggressor that seemingly didn't allow much time for relations between the two orders to play out before he decided to attack, when you consider that all of this happened within the span of a year. Perhaps having knowledge of the Force Wars and what happened when Darksiders attempted to split from the Jedi, Xendor was certain that the two orders could not coexist peacefully, and so he chose to act, which as an act of precautionary self-defense might seem like an okay thing to do, but in reality isn't quite as understandable as it seems when you consider how quickly after establishing his order that he chose to launch this campaign, as I said a moment ago. That isn't to say Xendor's fears were unwarranted, for though at this time the Jedi really only had their experiences with the followers of Bogan, the Rakata, and the actions of a young Jedi named Kopshai Krill to draw from as far as the dark side went, the Jedi still had much to fear from the dark, so it was likely inevitable that conflict would erupt between the two orders, regardless of how much time they spent peacefully coexisting with one another, which would mean that Xendor's choice to take the fight to the Jedi before they took it to him was more so morally gray and not necessarily an evil thing to do. Something that's supported by the last testimony of a Jedi by the name of Danzigoro Potts that we can find in the Jedi vs. Sith, the Essential Guide to the Force sourcebook. A data card provides the following account by a Jedi Padawan who died on Kalumis during the First Schism after a battle with the legions of Leto. Popularly known as the Kalumis data card, it inspired at least 3 operas on Coruscant, although the suspected Sith sympathizer Ingo Wavlud once noted his belief that this particular account was nothing less than Jedi propaganda. Tests indicate the data card is authentic to the period. I have received the transmission, the news that General Xendor is dead. At last, we have prevailed over the legions of Leto. I know it may be wrong of me, but I am relieved by his death, as I trust it brings an end to this awful war. For the first time in months, I look forward to tomorrow. I wonder if I might find a spot of sunshine before morning. Better yet, I might find a familiar, friendly face, one that's still breathing. Forgive me, my masters. My thoughts go astray. I do not mean to dishonor your teachings by babbling. You know I was never good with words. I always wished I could make them flow better. My throat is so dry, and I'm bleeding something awful. I hope I'm holding this audio card right. Hear my words, fellow Jedi. I, the Jedi apprentice Danzigoro Potts, am the last survivor of the conflict on Kalumis. There were nearly 30 Dark Jedi, so we were fairly evenly matched. Tried to trap us in the ravine, they did. The battle was fierce and fast. It's so quiet now, peaceful even, but we can thank the Force for all we can thank the Force for... So sorry. I wanted to leave you with some important words. I guess I'm at a loss. I'm dying. I'm just going to say whatever I want to say. I killed my friend Blendry and her apprentice Kuthalox today, right here on the battlefield. Hadn't seen them since they ran off with my old master, Juk-Juk Abruzin, to join up with Xendor. Caught up with Abruzin on Korlag, and ran him through I did. But Blendry and Kuthalox kept getting away, one world to the next, all the way to here. Not that I wanted revenge, of course, but, well, all the rebels had to be stopped, did they not? I loved being a Jedi, loved it, wouldn't have changed a thing. But to be honest, after Blendry joined up with the legions of Leto, I started thinking about how long she'd been complaining about the Jedi Order being so sterile, about how bored she was by all that endless meditation. Understand, I was never tempted by the dark side. Being in the light was never a dangerous balancing act for me. It wasn't. Maybe it's because I'm simpler than some, or so Blendry says. I mean, that's what she used to say. But I never ducked a battle, and I never betrayed the Jedi. and I never wanted to do bad things. To the Jedi who finds this data card, I'm hoping you'll remember this about Blendry. You see, Blendry was my best friend when we were children. She was the one who showed me how to use the Force, even before we knew what the Force was. She was a good girl, Blendry was. A really good person. Maybe she teased me a few times when she became a Jedi Knight, and I was still an apprentice. But I knew she was just joking. The reason I mention this is because I don't think she joined the dark side and the Legions of Leto because she was evil. I think she just got tired of all the Jedi rules, being told what to do, how to behave, how not to behave, all the time. I think it crushed her a bit. As for all the other Jedi who left the Order to join the Legions, I don't know. It seems too easy to blame everything on Xendor and the dark side. Maybe the Jedi were partly to blame too. I'm not good with history, but I know that for more than 5 centuries, the Jedi didn't have much trouble with anyone. Sure, a dark Jedi here and there, I heard tell, but then along came Xendor, telling Jedi they didn't have to obey orders all the time. I know it sounds crazy, but I wonder, maybe the Jedi need an enemy. I think without a common enemy, we'll just wind up fighting each other and ourselves. Does that make sense? I'm getting really cold. I only wish... End of recording. Just like in Arden Lynn's account, Potts puts forth the notion that the Jedi may need a common enemy to rally against to keep infighting from occurring. But even with a common enemy in place, that isn't true, for even when there is one for them to focus their ire on, there have been plenty of Jedi who still fall to the dark side and create chaos within the Order and without. So perhaps the dark side and Xendor weren't to blame as Potts claims, and just as I said earlier, it's possible that Xendor, an intelligent man who acknowledged that the Force isn't just black and white, was a man who was going to create a dark side organization that could temper itself with humility, understanding, and a desire for coexistence with the other Force orders of the galaxy. But unfortunately, that's wishful thinking. For if we can't claim that Xendor's preemptive strike against the Jedi made him evil, we can certainly claim that it was indeed the dark side that would have made him so eventually. Precious few individuals in galactic history have allied themselves with the dark and not fallen to evil. And there hasn't been a single period in galactic history where a dark side organization held sway over the galaxy, or attempted to hold sway over it, that they did not unleash immense amounts of evil upon it. There are isolated cases of dark side civilizations, orders, and cultures flourishing on different planets that didn't engage in too many heinous practices. But even then, their societies were often dominated by infighting, sacrifice, and power-hungry warmongering that harmed their people more than it helped them. For the dark side is ultimately a poison. And the more and more one immerses themselves in it, the more susceptible they are to becoming corrupted to the point that they eventually begin massacring thousands, if not millions of innocent lives, as they pursue ever greater power. And in all likelihood, if Xendor had lived any longer than he did, he and his legions would have accomplished much the same. Xendor was already trying to poison the Republic against the Jedi, painting them as usurpers and aggressors. And though the start of his war was somewhat understandable, it was still a war, one that led to his demise and the demise of so many others. And evidence for what Xendor could have become and what further evil he may have unleashed could be confirmed by the existence of another dark side entity, the Dark Underlord. During the reign of Darth Ruin, a conflict began in 2000 BBY called the New Sith Wars, and during those wars in the year 1750 BBY, a Sith Lord known as the Dark Underlord emerged, a dark side force spirit who had the appearance of a skeletal wraith, one who wielded 2 Sith swords in battle rather than lightsabers, and founded a legion of Darksiders that he dubbed the Black Knights. Rumors abounded as to the origins of this mysterious figure, but one of the most popular theories was that it was the spirit of Xendor, a spirit that was recalled from the realm of chaos by another unknown Sith to fight for Darth Ruin and his order. While it's never been confirmed that the Dark Underlord was Xendor, the fact that he wielded metal swords in battle rather than a lightsaber, commanded a legion of warriors not unlike the legions of Leto, and supposedly let his spirit meld into the darkness rather than falling to Pina's lightsaber, could be, albeit not very concrete, proof that this individual was indeed Xendor reborn. But perhaps what supports this theory the most is the idea that this is Xendor as he appeared after thousands of years of his spirit languishing in the darkness of chaos, a once proud and admirable man who, after being immersed in the dark side for so long, became nothing more than a vengeful spirit hell-bent on waging war against the forces of the light, a massive corruption of who he was, and perhaps a nod to the idea that had he lived any longer, his fate would have been to become a man much like the Dark Underlord, a fate that we may have witnessed if his lover's plan to revive him many millennia later had come to pass, but that is a story for another time. Regardless of what may have come to pass had Xendor lived, his actions set the stage for the actions of many Darksiders who would follow in his footsteps, a legacy of rebellion and pursuit of the dark that would inspire and corrupt countless individuals who came after him, a notion that was even acknowledged by the exiled Dark Jedi who would eventually found the Order of the Sith Lords, as we can see in this excerpt from the Book of Sith. We rule the Sith. Here we will build a sovereignty of the dark side to overcome millennia of injustice. But I am the rightful ruler, for I alone possess the curiosity to translate their secrets and apply them to larger patterns of conquest. I foresee what will become a magnificent Sith Empire. While Corvos was the last battle of the 100-Year Darkness, the conflict began with the most recent Great Schism. Historians squabble over how many such splits have occurred within Jedi ranks. I care not for the exact number, but with each one, the Jedi Council's stranglehold on the ways of the Force weakened. The 100-Year Darkness was a spectacular, yet predictable, revolt against Jedi complacency. The Jedi Order has not evolved in nearly 20 millennia. Even after the Order's founding on Tython, its most curious members realized the failings of their teachers, and so began the First Great Schism. In those days, a Kashimir outsider named Xendor inspired several Jedi to question the light side, or Ashla. They discovered the use of the dark side, or Bogan, unlocked the shackles their Jedi masters had placed on the Force. Xendor's followers, those who believed as he did, but lacked his abilities, became his acolytes, or the legions of Leto. Of course, the Jedi fought. They fought with desperation, against a future in which they had no followers. History says that Xendor and his legions perished in the Battle of Kalumis. But that was not the tragedy of the First Great Schism. The tragedy was that the Jedi learned nothing. They could have embraced the dark side and become the central power of the empire that the legions of Leto sought to build. Instead, they returned to their antiquated ways and alienated their most gifted members. We exiles are the heirs to Xendor's bold heresy. Thank you all for tuning in to this episode of Analyzing Evil, and I hope you've enjoyed. What are your thoughts on Xendor? Did I miss anything? Let me know down below, and leave a suggestion for a villain you'd like to see featured while you're at it. If you like this video, hit that thumbs up button, and make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. A big thank you to all of my subscribers, my patrons, my members, anyone who's decided to honor me with a super thank, and especially Elijah Kai VA, our Dark Lord channel member. And a most vile thank you to those whose names you're seeing on screen now. Join the channel's Discord server and subreddit to interact with myself and the community, and follow me on the social media platforms listed below to keep up with the channel. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll be seeing you soon.